Joyce for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Mr. President and members of the Council, thank you for this opportunity to brief you on the humanitarian situation in Sudan. This brutal war has now lasted for 17 months, and there is no end in sight for this catastrophe. 10 months ago, we warned the Council of the catastrophic consequences of an attack on Fasher, a city of almost 1 million people, swelled with hundreds of thousands more seeking shelter after fleeing violence elsewhere. Since April 2023, we have briefed you on the worrisome developments in Fasher in no less than 6 Council meetings. And in June 2024, the Security Council called for an immediate halt to the fighting and for de-escalation in and around Fasher in Resolution 2736. Regrettably, these calls have not been heeded, and the humanitarian situation continues steadily to deteriorate. Since the end of last week, large-scale fighting in and around Fasher has escalated. Shelling and aerial bombardment have been constant and heavy. Civilians, especially women and children, have been hit. Civilian sites and infrastructure, including hospitals and internally displaced persons camps, have been hit. The lives of hundreds of thousands of people, including more than 700,000 IDPs in and around Fasher, are at immediate threat. And our concern is mounting as we receive reports of intense shelling of central and western parts of Fasher and deployment of additional forces. Mr. President, the threats to life posed by the fighting in Fasher are manifold. Parties to the conflict are making no efforts to protect health facilities or the civilians these facilities host. Hospitals and health facilities are being hit multiple times, rendering them non-operational. Of the 3 main hospitals in Fasher, only 1 hospital is functioning, although only partially following an attack that caused extensive damage in August. The only dialysis center in Fasher and facilities vital for the vaccine cold chain have also been attacked. Severe hunger is a spiraling threat, with close to 1.7 million people in North Darfur facing acute food insecurity. In August, the Famine Review Committee confirmed that there is famine in Zamzam camp, a site hosting around 500,000 people, roughly 15 kilometers south of Fasher. There are 13 other localities identified at risk of famine in North Darfur, including 2 displacement sites. You will recall that in February 2024, Médecins Sans Frontières reported that a child was dying in the Zamzam camp every 2 hours. Latest screening by MSF and the Ministry of Health between 1 and 5th of September indicates that the situation is only getting worse. About 34% of the children are malnourished, including 10% who are severely malnourished. Mr. President, the situation is being compounded by almost impassable obstacles to the delivery of humanitarian relief. Since May, roads into Zamzam and Fasher have been rendered inaccessible by fighting around the city, and more recently by damage caused by heavy rains and floods. We have been repeatedly unsuccessful in our attempts to access the area. The presence of humanitarian workers and operations in El Fasher is extremely limited, save for those local humanitarians who have stayed behind to look after their families. An interagency assessment in Zamzam camp on 27 August, led by partners, revealed that assistance to people who have been newly displaced into the camp is very limited. There have been no international staff in El Fasher since April 2024, and non-governmental programs have been curtailed. But we have far from given up. We are hoping that as flood water subsides in the coming weeks, we will be able to start moving supplies to El Fasher and other areas at risk of famine. In April, World Food Programme was able to provide food and nutrition assistance in the camp. Further attempts to move food and health supplies in August was not possible due to insecurity and flooding. To address the access challenges, the World Food Programme is already in the process of launching an operation to distribute food from commercial providers directly affected people in Zamzam. They're planning to reach 179,000 people this month, complementing efforts to bring in food across the front lines and across borders. Regardless, the essential factors for effectively addressing this grave situation will be a de-escalation in the fighting, as well as the willingness of the parties to facilitate safe access. Be in no doubt, without safe and predictable access and a steady supply of food and humanitarian supplies, we will see a dramatic spike in mortality, including children, in Zamzam and in other areas around El Fasher. Mr. President, the same goes for the situation across Sudan. Khartoum, Sennar, Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera all continue to be devastated by relentless violence. More than 8 million people have now been driven from their homes, and more than 2 million have fled over the border. The atrocious humanitarian situation calls for a rapid de-escalation in the conflict. We are therefore horrified by signs that the fighting will intensify as the rainy season draws to a close in the coming months. As we remain deeply troubled by the state of humanitarian access across the country, the reopening of the Adre crossing from Chad has been a significant step. More than 100 trucks have so far crossed the border with supplies for close to 300,000 people in West, Central, South Darfur. But the onward movement of supplies has been severely curtailed, including by damage caused by flooding and heavy rain. Only 55 trucks have reached their destination. A large-scale and unhindered humanitarian operation is required to save lives, and it is a matter of life and death. For this, it is vital that additional cross-border access is granted, including through the Awale and Panakwach routes. It also requires immediate, safe cross-line access from Port Sudan to Al Jazeera, Sennar, Khartoum, Darfur, and Kordofan states through Adaba, Shendi, and Sennar. Mr. President, too many people have already lost their lives in this senseless conflict. Many more will do so unless this Council and the international community at large take decisive action. First, I urge you to demand that the parties comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and Security Council resolutions, we urge you to ensure they do so. The parties must refrain from targeting civilians, civilian assets, and essential facilities such as hospitals. They must allow the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian relief via all possible cross-line and cross-border routes. And they must facilitate safe passage for those fleeing the violence. Second, the world should not abide in El Fasher the atrocities we witnessed in West Darfur. I call on member states to put pressure on the parties to agree to a humanitarian pause, to save lives, give civilians respite, and allow us to deliver assistance. Third, I call on donors to provide the much-needed resources to address this unprecedented crisis. As of 17 September, funding for the humanitarian appeal is $1.3 billion, less than 50% of our $2.7 billion ask. Mr. President, next week, dozens of world leaders will descend on New York for the opening of the General Assembly. Many are representatives of countries with influence on the parties in Sudan. Surely this and the multiple high-level meetings on Sudan will provide an unmissable opportunity to bring an end to this conflict and demonstrate our solidarity with the people of Sudan. Millions of lives depend on us. It is time to act.